And I kind of see, because students are in the holiday mode, probably quite, feeling relaxed to not involve with any academic activities so far. But today we are so glad that, Faculty of Social Sciences, by the help of Pak Jamhari Ma'ruf, the one sitting behind, invite Professor Kim Hyung Jun to be with us today, to come in person to this university and give a talk about leaders of Muhammadiyah and democratic tradition in Indonesia. So, as you've probably noticed in the flyer, that Professor Kim Hyung Jun is indeed, one of the um, little, a few experts of Indonesian Islam in Korea. So he has done quite extensive research and publication on Muhammadiyah and Indonesia, and also the other angles of, Islamism in this country. He also has written some papers on Asian, on um, uh, Christian Muslim relations, yeah, in Indonesia, and also about the Islamism in rural society in this region. So we are beyond, um, grateful to be able to hear directly his, findings over decades, I think, about this subject. So the time and floor is yours, Professor Kim.
Thank you, Nia. Uh, yes, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm very glad to be here to give some ideas of my research on an Islamic organization, Muhammadiyah. As you may know, there are two big organizations in Indonesia, and one is Muhammadiyah, and the other one, a little bigger one, is NU. And actually, there are a lot of researchers who are doing research about NU, but actually, there are not many on Muhammadiyah. I'm not sure about the reason why researchers usually do not have interested in Muhammadiyah, but from my experiences, if I finish my first research on Muhammadiyah later, I do not have any intention to continue my research in Muhammadiyah. That actually activities in Muhammadiyah is quite boring. What they do is just doing gatherings, meeting, something like that. What they do is just talk. There's not many activities surrounding Muhammadiyah, so that might be one of the reasons why researchers usually do not have such a keen interest in Muhammad. Before I start my lecture, I have to say two things. First one is related to my language. I'm Korean, and my mother tongue is Korean. And for me, both Indonesian and English is second language. So in that sense, to me, what is the most difficult thing, the most difficult situation is to speak English in Indonesian because, yeah, just before this lecture, I have to speak in Indonesian. And uh, yesterday I was in a city called Jogja. It's in central Java. And I sometimes mixed Japanese with Indonesian. So my brain is a bit confusing. So I'm not sure whether which language I'm using. So I there might be a lot of mistakes in my speech. So please think about my situation. And the second thing is related to the topic of today's lecture. And actually, it is not from me. It's from Nia. And maybe a week ago, she made this wonderful title of the lecture. And at that time I thought yes, because there are some keywords that I want to say, something like leaders and democratic tradition. But I think 2 or 3 days ago, I realized that the title is not that good for my lecture. And actually, the title is some quite irrelevant because what I'm trying to say is there of Muhammadiyah and democratic tradition in Muhammadiyah, not in Indonesia. But at the same time, I think it might be a very good question. I have never asked that sort of question. The one of the key things that I try to say today is that Muhammadiyah is a very democratic organization. And there are several elements which support why Muhammadiyah should be democratic. But I have never asked what kind of contribution do Muhammadiyah has to Indonesian society in general. If Muhammadiyah is democratic enough, that means there should be some influence from Muhammadiyah to the Indonesian society in general. But I think there are not many. Uh, I firmly believe Muhammadiyah itself is very democratic, but there are many leaders from with Muhammadiyah background who are working in the political world of Indonesia, and there are heaps of uh, celebrities in this having a background of Muhammadiyah, but they know democratic tradition within the organization, but I'm not sure whether they are active enough to spread their experience in Muhammadiyah to the outer society. So the title is very intuitive to me. So I have to think why, what contributions Muhammadiyah have made for the political situation of Indonesia or something like that. So I think that could be a task that you have to answer, not me. I'm not that interested in Indonesian politics in general. So that's the two that I have to say before I start my lecture. Yeah, and yeah. So he Dalan, who founded Muhammadiyah back 1912, I think. And at that time, when he first founded Muhammadiyah, the leadership system stipulated in the article of organization is collective. They call it, they sometimes call it collegial, but anyway, it is collective and collegial. So that central board members at the time it was nine. So nine central board members around the organization on equal terms through collective decision making. That was the rule which is put in the articles of organization. But actually, at the early period of Muhammadiyah, it was run a little bit different, not a little bit, totally different from the rule, because Ahmad Dahlan, he's the only person who can manage everything, who established every activities in Muhammadiyah. So actually, Muhammadiyah was based on a one-person leadership. He was leader, so it's Muhammadiyah when Muhammadiyah was first established. But still, they have some collective system in the article in rule in papers. So it was a bit strange to me why Muhammadiyah inserted collective leadership system in spite of the fact that it is dominated. It was dominated by Ahmad Dahlan, and it's not that conclusive, but I believe that at the beginning of the 20th century, when Indonesians say modern organization, some of the organization, a famous organization at the time, was based on collective leadership. So what I'm thinking is that Ahmad Dahlan want to establish a modern organization, and for him, modern organization have to have a system of collectivism, something like that. So I suspect that he just put it as a symbol that Muhammadiyah is belong to a modern organization, even if the actual leadership system was based on his own. That was the first situation of leadership in Muhammadiyah. And the thing was that yeah, he passed away 1923 or some years. And then after Dahlan's death, the activists of Muhammadiyah had to face some dilemmatic situation. What they knew at the time was a one-person system of leadership, but in theory, they have to use collective system, and for that collective system, they have to choose the election in order to choose central board members nine. So after the death of Ahmad Dahlan, Muhammadiyah members tried to realize what was written on the articles of organization. So they have to carry out elections. And the result of you can see two results of election, which is carried out in the year of 1925 and 1928. And you can the result of election. And I think with just uh, like this, we can easily say that Muhammadiyah has maintained a tradition of democracy because for almost 100 years they have democratic elections like this. So in 25, there was time that I can see from the written materials that a record that they have carried out elections. So from 1925 to 2015, actually, I have to replace it with 2022, but I was not at the Congress of Muhammadiyah last time, so I just put it like that. A total of 25 elections, which means now 26 elections were held among Muhammad by Muhammadiyah. So the tradition of selecting leaders by election I think, was remarkable to the eyes of ordinary persons in the early 20th century. So it is now common, but 100 years ago, yeah, it was a marvelous. It's something like a festival of democracy at the time. Yeah, and Muhammadiyah has a very special way, peculiar way of selecting leaders. There are three. First one is the ways of collecting nomination for uh, candidates. Usually, 100 or 200 persons were selected for the. And the second phase is selecting 39 candidates from nominees by votes. They start the first stage of voting for selecting 39 candidates. And actually, no Muhammadiyah activists know why they choose 39 members, but yeah, because board members, number 13, they say just is 3 times larger than the number of central board members. But anyway, they select 39 candidates from all the nominees. And then in the last phase 3, they select 13 out of 39. So that was the process uh, of election in Muhammadiyah, and there are two rounds of votes. First to select 39 candidates, and then select 13 candidates. And the peculiarity in the procedures of election in Muhammadiyah is block voting. So the voters must select multiple candidates, as many as the number of the central board. When the number of central board was nine, they have to select nine members. When the number of central board uh, increases increases to 13, they have 13. And for the second phase, it also applies, which means that the voters have to select 39 names from, for example, 100 candidates, which is a process which is very difficult. So this is the picture that I have in the last Congress in Makassar, I think 2015. And as you can see, it is the ballot paper and 39 names written by the voters, or just numbers. And they have changed it recently to the electronic votes, so they no longer write down their names. But anyway, this is the last time they still employs the old ones. So this is the picture which could not be taken now, and I'm very proud that I have pictures of the ballot papers. So these are the ways of election and how to uh, how voters choose names of candidates from 39 or from 100. So that sort of procedures has made for more than 100 years. So I think it's a very good of democracy that have known to Indonesia. And now I'm talking about the unexpected outcome of voting. So when I said before Dalam passed away, Muhammadiyah was managed by himself. So which means that it's just one man organization. But passed away, they have to choose leaders with the procedure that I have explained. But when they started to carry out this sort of election, they have to face an outcome which they have never expected before. Because at the time, yeah, this was the first case that the taking they undertook this sort of election. So what I paid attention to was margin between first between the first candidate who got the largest number of votes and the second one get who obtained the second largest votes. And as you can see, margin between the number of votes obtained by the first and the second place candidates was not that large. It is very narrow. So as you can see in the from the outcome of 2019 and elections, the gap between the first and the second is just something like 20 votes, and it was quite similar. The result was quite similar. Uh, it was when they first carried out elections in 1925 and 1928. So I analyzed some of the materials, and I have about 16 cases, 1920s to 2015. And the margin between the first and the second and the 13 uh, candidate who placed at the 13th. And as you can, margin between the first and second is not big. So the second candidate usually obtain about 90%. And there's some differences, but the general trend is quite same. So the votes the leaders get is not that what the gap is not large. Differentiate one from the other. And that was finding of mine, and it is the interpretation of my analysis. So with the sort of voting result, I believe that religious authority and popularity of leaders cannot be expressed and confirmed institutionally. So, among the leaders of Muhammadiyah who were quite famous was something like Amin Rais, and back in 1920s there is a leader called Fakhruddin, and Fakhruddin and Amin Rais was a public figure. They were very popular, and yeah, people uh, are quite enthusiastic about their influence in Muhammadiyah. But the thing is that even if some authoritative or influential figure has run for the election, the result that he can get is just a little bit more than those who are placed in the second place, which means the authority or influence of a leader cannot be uh, expressed through election. That was one of the interpretation that I have made. So I believe that election provides to Muhammadiyah members that chances to appreciate that leadership should not be concentrated on a single person, but should be distributed to a group of leaders. So with the election system, the collective leadership of Muhammadiyah can be maintained. If someone, a very charismatic or authoritative leader emerges, but he cannot get enough votes to show his differences from others. So all of the leaders within the leadership board has anyway has their proper number of votes, which means that they are quite sure of their positions within the system of leadership. And that can make the decision making process within Muhammadiyah quite democratic. So one or two persons cannot dominate the decision-making process, but they have they realize that all have uh, all have substantial number of support from ordinary members, which is proven by the votes they obtained from the election. So I believe the system of election which entered into Muhammadiyah not intentionally. So Ahmad Alan did not have any idea on uh, how the outcome of the election, because has not he did not get through this sort of processes. Yeah, in the leadership there was no election, but everyone just applause. Yeah, then he was selected as leader. So it was one of the reasons why Muhammadiyah can maintain the collective leadership system. That was the first conclusion that I have made. And last year I have published a book on Muhammadiyah in Korean. So hopefully I'm trying to translate it into English, but yeah, the job is very slow. So this is the schematic idea of my book on Muhammadiyah. So I'm saying that Muhammadiyah has maintained a democratic of tradition which cannot be seen in other parts of the world. So chosen was here, yeah, six, and one of the pillar is leadership system, the election, and the collective decision-making process. And the other one is something like ideology. It has an ideology which put emphasis on egalitarianism, so equality among members. That's the official idea of Muhammadiyah. And the system of operation or system of managing amal usaha means something like educational or health institutions. As you may know, there are about 70 universities founded by Muhammadiyah, and there are about hundreds of secondary schools, and there are thousands of elementary schools managed by Muhammadiyah, and there are heaps of hospitals too. So, of managing organization or the system of managing amal usaha are quite, and because it is based on the idea of autonomy and self-sufficiency and decentralization. So all of the central ideas of democracy exist in Muhammadiyah. And the decision-making process is quite based on consensus. And one another aspect which is quite difficult to explain is the relationship between leaders. And I found out that uh, there are there is an emphasis on the separation of between private and the public. So it it's compared to other themes, it's a bit difficult to examine how leaders of Muhammadiyah interact in the organization. It was a bit difficult. So it was the chapter which takes a lot of time for me to find out materials and to make some explanation on. And today I have talked about the leadership system, the election, and later I just talk briefly on the uh, issue of inter-leaders relations. And if we look at the background of leaders from the establishment from the beginning to 1950s, uh, the central locality of the leaders was a place called Gauman. It is a small area which is located at the center of Jogja. And as you can see, there were 6 and 8 presidents of Muhammadiyah between 1920 to 1968. And of the 8 leaders, 6 were from Gauman. And actually, they had some kinship relations like this. So the first one is Dahlan, and the second leader was Ibrahim, and he was son-in, yeah, brother-in-law of Dahlan. So it was like that Muhammadiyah was uh, dominated by people from very small area of Gauman, and they were the core group of Gauman before 1950s. So it was something like a big family of intimately and closely knit activists. So it was Muhammadiyah was managed by them before 1950s. But after that, the locality has been diversified. So as you can see, there are 4 areas, regions. One is Kauman in Jogja, and the second one is Jogja and Java, Sumatra, and others. I have analyzed the place of birth of the Central Board members from 1950 to 2015. And as you can see, the number from Kauman has decreased, and there are only one at the moment. And if he passed away, I think there might be no one from what Kauman who is famous enough to be included into the leadership board of Muhammadiyah. So what I'm trying to say is that the position of Gauman and Jogja, which have dominated Muhammadiyah, has been decreasing at the moment. So locality has not operated as the key to select the central board members, which means that yeah, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, people, Muhammadiyah activists or members of Muhammadiyah still have some, yeah, sort of respect to people from originated from Gauman. But these days, it seems that there's no consideration for the importance of Gauman or Jogja in Muhammadiyah. So their background has been diversified. And secondly, the composition of leaders has been changed in terms of education. Before 1980s, there are not many PhDs. And I just wrote a result of comparison between leaders in 1990 and 95 and leaders from 2010 to 2015 in order to make the comparison easier. So as you can see these days, almost all, I can say that almost all top leaders in Muhammadiyah have their PhDs. Yeah, it's a very strange thing because Muhammadiyah is anyway a religious organization, but it is dominated at the moment by, yeah, intellectuals. It so people, even those activists in Muhammadiyah, say that there has shift from ulama, traditional religious leaders, one or intellectuals. So the moment they are saying so, Muhammad has to find out some more ulamas because there's not many ulamas in Muhammadiyah. So all of the leaders at the moment has to have, yeah, at least master degree, as you can see in 2010 and 2015. Yeah, the majority of them have PhD degree. This data, what I'm trying to say is that there happens, first, firstly, there happens from ulama to intellectuals. And secondly, we can say that in contrary to the traditional education in Pesantren, some hierarchical timid teacher relations centering on Islamic education are seldom formulated among the readers, which means that most of them have PhDs from different universities. So they do not make any sort of student teacher relations centering on Islamic teaching. So all of leaders in Muhammadiyah obtain their own religious education from different places. Or there are some, yeah, something like uh, Win Jakarta or Win Jogja have some alumni in their leadership board, but still their background of learning Islam is quite different from the traditional Ahmadiyya leaders. So most of them are working in universities at the moment. And because they obtained education from, yeah, university called, we can call secular universities. Their majors are quite different and covers diverse areas. So as you can, those who are major in Islam, yeah, here is from Win Jakarta or somewhere. So I put them specialized in major in Islam. Is, yeah, for example, for 2010 and 15, there are about 20 leaders. But those who are major in humanities and social sciences, yeah, it outnumbers those learning Islam. And as you can see, natural sciences and medical sciences also have some portion among the background, educational background of Muhammadiyah leaders. So it's a very actually peculiar situation which can take place in the religious organization. All much of them have have received education in secular universities, and much of them have a major have majored non-Islamic subjects. Like there are some who have majored anthropology. Yeah, some two or three top leaders of Muhammadiyah has studied anthropology, something like that. So it's a very large percentage of persons, leaders, do not receive not proper traditional, yeah, Islamic education. So we can see that the majority of leaders, Muhammadiyah leaders, have experienced Western educational methods and curriculum, yeah, like this university. So for them, learning Islam is not only for knowledge to be memorized, like traditional Pesantren, but also for knowledge to be understood and interpreted. So that is the Islam that majority of Muhammadiyah leaders support these days. And because of this, I can say that there exists some sort of diversification and fragmentation of leaders among Muhammadiyah. So they are not connected to each other. There is no intimate student teacher relations among the leaders. All of them got their own education from different institutions, different persons like that. So because of this diversification, I think the possibility of building affection within is has been decreased. Actually, there are some who are saying that there exists some sort of faction groups, small group, exclusive groups within Muhammadiyah, but actually it cannot be termed faction because there's no definite ideology, there's no definite persons, membership or something like that. So when Muhammadiyah activists say about faction, it's related to someone who are living in Jakarta and someone who are living in Jogja, two places which are important for Muhammadiyah. So something like that. And lastly, it because yeah, it is related to the diversification of the backgrounds of the leaders. And at the same time, we can find out a very strong emphasis on the separation between the public and the private in the discourse of Muhammadiyah. Yeah, it's from about 100 years ago. At the passing away of Ahmad, they tried to put regulation on the forefront of their managing organization. So it is in the level of discourse, actually. There are some, yeah, vision of the public, private in Muhammadiyah. There also exists a phenomenon like that. But anyway, in general terms, they emphasize the separation. And they also object to the formation of intimate relations among leaders at the level of discourse. It's a bit strange because they have to manage a very big organization, but still at the same time they tend to object to the formation of intimate relations. So the result is described by loss of personal attacks in inter-leader relation. Yeah, it's a term from Haidar Nasir, is the moment the president of Muhammadiyah. And the former president of Muhammadiyah, Shafi Marif, he said that the relationship between us in Muhammadiyah is quite dry, something like that. So the leaders and activists realize that their personal relations within organization is quite impersonal. So they do not, they are, of course, they are because it is the society where people live. So there might be some group which are very close, but still at the level of discourse and actually in the course of interaction, they try to object to uh, the formation of intimate relations among members. So it is a quote from by Rochas Soler. Yeah, he was the central board member for 30 years or more, and he said that observing life in Muhammadiyah gives the impression that practices of visiting each other, close contacts are not realized. It can be seen that the relationship between us, both vertical and horizontal, is limited to formal ones. So yeah, it is quite difficult. Even yeah, I'm doing some sort of ethnographic research, but it is quite difficult to find out materials to show that relationship among between leaders are quite not inform, are quite formal, and they do not form close relationship. Yeah, it is quite difficult. But anyway, in general terms, in the discourse of Muhammadiyah and yeah, in reality, they try not to build a very close relationship among, for example, between students and teachers. The teachers do not make very intimate and, in some sense, authoritative relationship with students. The Muhammadiyah members are quite proud that students never, uh, teachers never ask something or demand something to their students. That's what they say. But I believe there are actually are some exceptions. But anyway, in general terms, we can say they emphasize that Muhammadiyah activists should not make very close interpersonal relations, something like that. And this trend in Muhammadiyah brings some sort of emphasis on formality in managing the organization. So because the personal context, personal what relationship is not considered important, so that the way of managing organization can be more, which means it can be managed more democratically. So some leaders always say that, for example, yeah, whenever I force them to say something about the privileges of leaders, they always say, well, there's no privileges at all. They cannot even find out positions in the hospitals. This was the story that they always try to convey, that, for example, about 10 or 15 years to obtain a bed in Muhammadiyah hospital was difficult. So there are some leaders who are saying that they try to demand some place for their relatives in Muhammadiyah hospital, but they always failed. It was a jargon, it was a story almost all leaders of Muhammadiyah have. So in that sense, I'm not sure whether it actually happened in that way, because in Indonesia, if you have some influential persons, you can, yeah, get a lot by way of him or she. But anyway, the leaders of Muhammadiyah always try, whenever I ask about their privileges as a leader, they are saying that, oh, even a bed, even a place in Muhammadiyah hospital cannot be secured by me, something like that. So in this is because they are saying that the relationship between leaders in Muhammadiyah is quite formal. They do not what tolerate an emergence of very close interpersonal relations among the leaders. So in that sense, they think they can manage the organization democratically. So that was uh, the idea that I tried to convey today. And this is the last question, actually, uh, uh, that I want to ask to you. So yeah, actually, it was not yet proven that Muhammadiyah is democratic enough. We need a bit more data to show, to demonstrate that Muhammadiyah is democratic enough. But anyway, given that Muhammadiyah's election system and Muhammadiyah's ways of what interrelationship is democratic enough, then we can raise a question. What does the existence of democratic tradition in Muhammadiyah mean to Indonesia? So, as I said before, yeah, it was a question that Nia has raised to me with the title of this lecture. And as I said, it can be just a proof of an indigenous form of democracy in Indonesia. I think it is also important, even if Muhammadiyah does not contribute anything to Indonesian society. I think it is a very good example that traditional Indonesian society has a model of democracy. Yeah, it is a little bit imported from outside world, but still it was developed and it happened by Indonesians, Muslims. So in that sense, Muhammadiyah can be a proof that Indonesian traditional society or Indonesian society is quite prone to democratic development. That could be one conclusion. And we can think about contribution of Muhammadiyah to the development of democracy in Indonesia. And it's a very tricky question. Yes, I have to. I kept thinking about that, and actually, there are not many. Muhammadiyah is democratic enough, but people having a background of Muhammadiyah do not seem to be democratic enough. Yeah, there are some parties based on, for example, in historical terms, we have an is called Mashumi, and it was not democratic at all. Yeah, and now we have a party called PAN. Yeah, and it's not that yeah democratic enough. So I am yeah I'm also a little bit how can I say confusing. If I say that Muhammadiyah is democratic enough, it means that activists from Muhammadiyah also understand how to manage the organization or manage the nation democratically. But yeah, some of you might have some clues, have some contributed a little bit to the development of democracy in Indonesia. But yeah, at the moment, I do not have any clear ideas of that. And we can find out some more ideas. So, trying to say today is that there is an Indonesian Islamic organization which can be perceived, can be evaluated to be democratic enough. And I want actually you to carry out some more researches on this topic. So the strangest thing, as I said before, is that people love to talking about Muhammadiyah, but they do not want to do research on Muhammadiyah. At the moment, a lot of researches have been carried out by Muhammadiyah activists, but not from people from outside Muhammadiyah. So, in this sense, it is a very big opportunity for research, and the topic or area of research has not been properly filled by scholars. So I believe some of you might have interest in Muhammad, Muhammadiyah tradition of democracy or some other aspects of uh, how Muhammadiyah is working. So that was what I'm trying to say today. And if you have some more questions, yeah, now we can talk together. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Kim. That was, beyond my expectation when I give you the title. That there are still indeed many things need to be done, although I'm sure, as probably some Indonesian scholars have already some answers in the mind, right, pertaining this case. But yeah, we can just exchange and share between us, within the discussion. So yeah, so far I just want to a little bit summarize up the presentation, 1 hour talk. We have been dragged into understanding, the voting. There is that kind of a tradition of vote in Muhammadiyah as an organization, Islamic organization, and also Professor Kim has taken us to learn about the leaders, the way they interact with each other, the pillars, how they provide the support that become the pillar of the democratic system, yeah, in the organization. And also Professor Kim highlights about the locality of the leaders, how it was, previously in earlier in the first half of 20th century, pretty much based on one source, and that the Kauman, and then on the later periods, we've seen like there is that kind of diversification. And also he highlights about the educational background, yeah, to understand how far, to what extent, the tradition has been implemented and run. And yeah, pretty much, this is very interesting topic to continue, and has, as he said, there are still needs some further research that connect Muhammadiyah as Islamic organization to the political democratic, um, uh, yeah, movement, right, in Indonesia. So I open the time for questioning. I believe we have some interesting questions or comments. For instance, yeah, I see Aldi here. Yeah. Okay, and then there is Ali. Okay, and then there is one from a lady. Your name? Yeah, from Dia. So would you like to answer one by one, or you just collect one by? Okay, one by one. Okay, we can start from Aldi first.
Thank you for the opportunity, and we are glad to having you here, Professor Hyung Jung Kim. Yes, Professor Kim. Okay. Well, I have two questions here that related to the uh, Muhammadiyah historically and the current development of Muhammadiyah. So, well, historically speaking, under Suharto regime, Muhammadiyah was being co-opted by authoritarian regime, right? Conversely, NU was being opposition to the government, especially under Abdurrahman Wahid. So, do you think with the democratic tradition of Muhammadiyah now can impact on the prevention of authoritarian regime in the future in Indonesia? Like, uh, with the increasing of cendekiawan or intellectual in Muhammadiyah can be influential aspect to affirm that Muhammadiyah is gonna stand for democratic values in Indonesia because well there might be some events that Muhammadiyah along with Nahdlatul Ulama and OMUI also has contributed to conservatism in Indonesia. That's the first question. Yeah. And the second question is Do you observe deeply how is the process of election in Muhammadiyah? Is there any sort of clientelism, patronage, or money politics inside Muhammadiyah that commonly happens in Indonesian elections? Well, why in the Islamic mass organization, religious authority and popularity of leaders cannot be expressed and confirmed institutionally? Of course, there may be some factors to shape it because Islamic mass organization in Indonesia is significantly influential enough. And of course, there is a power competitions among Muslim elite inside Muhammadiyah and other mass organizations. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a wonderful question. And in principle, there is no campaign in Muhammadiyah election. I firmly believe about 20 or 30 years ago, there definitely should not any campaigns for the candidates. And recently, for 2 or 3 elections, the competition seems to be a little bit hot, but still, at the surface, it is quite difficult to support someone or to carry out some campaigns because one of the key concepts which dominates Muhammadiyah is sincerity. Ikhlas in yeah yeah, everyone knows the concept ikhlas. It is from Arabic. So in this sense, when you try to s- obtain support from others, it is considered as what contrary to the culture of ikhlas. So in that sense, there has been no tradition of campaign, and even for example, about 40 years ago, back in 1980s, they actually do not know who the profile of the candidates because the book at the moment they make some profile book containing profiles of the candidates so you can see who the candidate is, but back in 1980s they until that time they did not make this sort of book. So actually what you can as a voter what you can see in the place for ballot voting was just the name of persons. So you have to choose 13 or yeah, some persons. So in that sense, I cannot say that elections in Muhammadiyah is totally clean. But in general, yeah, because there is no campaign, there is no factions, and so there is some sort of discourse that someone who try to get support from others, if it is known to the general public, then not she, he would be definitely fail in the election. And there was some cases back in 1995. There was some fights between Amin Rais and another called Lukman Harun, and both of them showed their ambition to be elected as the central board member, something like that. They had the interview with the newspaper or something like that. So the Lukman Harun, he was a very strong candidate for the president. He could not even enter into the big 35. So his name was not included in the second phase of election. So it's not the situation is not like that these days. It's more hot. Back in 2015 in Makassar, people showed more interest in election. But before that time, before 2010 in Jogja, people were less interested in election. They were quite interested in election, but they pretend not to be interested in it, something like that. So I cannot say that definitely Muhammadiyah election is clean. Yeah, there might be something behind, the scene. But anyway, in general terms, we can say because it, campaign is not permitted, you have to do your some sort of what campaigns for support in secret, which means that yeah, it cannot be seen from the outside. Only some of the very intimate persons may have, and yeah, something like that. So in general terms, I believe that the election of Muhammadiyah is carried out clean without money, with without faction or something like that. That was the answer to my to your second question. And the first question was I always ask that question to Muhammadiyah leaders. Y- because they are saying that yeah, we managed our organization democratically. So I asked them, how about if Muhammadiyah is democratic enough, then you have to make Indonesian society democratic enough. Yeah, and they say, yeah, not yet, or something like that. That's the typical answer. And I, yes, the Indonesians they are not that brave enough. Even if so, there are some leaders who are saying that they can manage Muhammadiyah democratically because what they see outside Muhammadiyah is not that democratic. So they they want to make Muhammadiyah like a haven, a place they can how can I they can what realize their own dream. So something like that. So they to be very try to confine their ideas of democracy to the organization rather than struggle to make the society more democratic. So if I ask the sort of question to Muhammadiyah leaders, oh, they say, yeah, one day, someday, we may be able to contribute to the democracy of Indonesia, but at the moment, yeah, it is a bit difficult to do so. So because of that, it can be seen that their position is much more conservative in political terms. So they try to maintain the status quo rather than bring some changes. So that was a little bit contradictory attitude, but they still stick to the internal democracy own rather than make the society democratic.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting answers, which remind me that, if we are in political science, then we're gonna hear quite often about how the locality, has been one of the problem to the modern, liberal democracy in Indonesia. And perhaps it's much related to the tradition in the political institutions and also the structures that applied within it. Of course, this is kind of another layers that we can add to the discussion. But yeah, they just a comment. We go to the second question. Ali.
Thank you, Professor. Muhammad Ali from Yemen.
Oh,
Yeah.
this one now. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, my question is, I want just to understand the election system within the organization, Muhammadiyah organization. Is it the voter turnout is all general members, maybe more than 40 million member in within Muhammadiyah organization. So is the election process actually it all this 40 million? Because 40 million population is like one country. My country actually population is 30 million. It's not 40 million again. And I understand that two-term two-term election system is difficult within little number of candidates. So how the organization actually manage 3 terms election within many of candidates, a lot of number of candidates, more than 100 candidate. So is that including all general members in within the Muhammadiyah organization, or there is specific with the election system about the voters? And another question is why there is no women within leaders election?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
And the second one is a little bit easier because Muhammadiyah has their own women's organization called ICA. So called ICA. So most women activists in Muhammadiyah run elections in ICA. So there's not many. There are several sometimes, but there has been no one who was ever among women activists ever elected as the central board members for the last 100 years. And the first one is, yeah, actually, it should be like that. So, and as far as I know, it the system of direct election continues until 1960s, I believe. And after that, because the voters were too many, they could not calculate. So the those who attended the election numbered about 50,000 or something like that. So the election committee have to spend almost a week. That was the record. Almost a week to calculate the the what number of the votes that candidates obtained. So from 1968 or something like that, they changed it to representative democracy. So there are approximately 2,000 voters who represent the, the the branches. They came to the Congress to make a vote. So in that sense, though, still it takes a lot of time because, for example, 2000 put 13 names, which means yeah, it is something like more than 20,000 or something like that. And they before this time, back in 2015, they calculate the name one by one, not using what computer or something like that. So in that sense, it was quite troublesome. But still, I believe even if it was very difficult, and even if more more than 1,000 persons participate in votes, I think it could be something like festival of democracy for them. So they waited for the coming of the outcome or something like that. So they gave up direct democratic system, yeah, back in 1968, I believe, I think. And after that, they are using representative system.
Okay, okay, that's that. Yeah, we go to the next question from Sister Dia.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Dia Bardia from Economics and Business Faculty. Yesterday, I read a book, Islamic Law in Indonesia, by Rivial Ka'bah. It's about specific about Lajnah Tarji and Batsul Masail in Nadatul Ulama. And I have so many information about organization. My question is, uh, what's your opinion about um, the weakness and the strengths about organization? I know now from your presentation, Muhammadiyah has good management and financial in other sector because they have a good election process on their election, their leader, and we know the strengths and Nahdlatul Ulama, they very master in uh, knowledge. like Kitab Kuning, Kitab Kuning of knowledge of Islam or our religion. And the second is, in the future, is it possible two organizations collaborate in the sector like financial and management? Because now we know that they are very far relation on relationship. Thank you. That's all.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, and I love this. The thing is that if I say Muhammadiyah manages their own organization democratically, yeah, it means that it has strength, which goes beyond the ordinary ways of managing the organization. But to me, Muhammadiyah managed the organization too democratically. Yeah, we cannot imagine that certain organization can be managed democratically. That what that could mean in reality. So the thing is that in democracy, yeah, we can say everything. We can say yeah, then we can suggest anything, something like that. And these voices are actually considered important, but still, because it is too democratic, so they could not make decisions efficiently and fastly enough to cope with the situation. That was a very serious problem, I think, not just for Muhammadiyah, but because in actual fact, we have not had democratically managed organization in the world. So in that sense, we look for a system of democracy, like something like that. But when actually the organization is managed in democratic ways, it should be very inefficient. Yeah, everyone say something, and you have to listen to that. So if are attentive enough, you can say that when Muhammadiyah makes some decisions, it takes a lot of time. So when, for example, there are some issues, national issues in Indonesia, usually ANU makes a lot of comments on that. But Muhammadiyah usually do not make any statement because they are running democratically. So whenever there are some issues, there are always a diverse opinions that cannot be make certain sort of consensus. So it was the weaknesses of the democratically managed organization. So all of Muhammadi activists say that if there are some issues, national issues, probably 1 or 2 years afterwards, Muhammadiyah finally can make certain decision on that. Yeah, because they have to think about different what ideas. So it is a little bit connected to the conservatism of Islamic organization of Muhammadiyah because and very conservative views can be accommodated, should be accommodated within Muhammad. There are leaders very radical, and you may see that the the radicalism in Indonesia actually is, I cannot say have a root in Muhammadiyah or something like that. Of course not, but has a close relationship with Muhammadiyah radical groups in radical Islamic groups. But at the same time, there are pluralists in Muhammadiyah too. So how can you accommodate both opinions democratically? It's a very tricky question. So Muhammad always try to be at middle of the way. So that was their strategy because they should be democratic. But in order to be democratic, you cannot make some radical or extreme statement. Yes, because it could not reflect voices of all members. So I think Muhammadiyah has a very, how can I say, yeah, weaknesses like that. It 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 is quite democratically managed, but it is very inefficient. And secondly, there might be some chances, or and last last Monday, I think the Win Jogja. I'm much more familiar with EIN Sunan Kalijogo, the in Jogja. They held something like a honorary doctor delivering honorary doctor degrees. Firstly to a Muhammadiyah leader, and secondly to Anu, and thirdly to Catholic priest. So it shows that, yeah, Muhammadiyah, Anu, and Catholics, yeah, they can work together on surface. But in actual fact, yeah, the Anu and Muhammadiyah totally have a different system of organization. So which means that in case of Muhammadiyah, democracy is important. In the case of Anu, the authority of leaders is the key to manage the organization. So without that, without the respect or without the authority of religious leaders, a few limited religious leaders, and who could not be survive because that's the basis of their what, establishment and their survival. So in that sense, almost in all aspects, as previously I showed the schematic view, all of the ideas written in Muhammadiyah is contrary to what actually happens, what actually take place in Anu. So in this sense, Anu cannot be harmonious with Muhammadiyah, and Muhammadiyah cannot be harmonious. Yeah, they tend to be, and in some several occasions at the national level, yeah, they can work together. For example, to fight against corruption, yeah, they also can do something, and some inter-religious relations, they can do something. But at the grassroots level, I think Anu and Muhammadiyah cannot work together. Yeah, that's my impression. And actually, for example, even these days, Muhammadiyah is minority in East Java. So still, I heard that if Muhammadiyah activists try to build a mosque in some rural areas of East Java, yeah, the heaps of protest from Anu, then Anu Muhammadiyah activists were expelled from that region or something like that. So, yeah, in that sense, yeah, we can say the harmonious relations between the two organizations can be achieved, but they cannot work together to make something together. Yeah, so that's my answer.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. We have like 10 minutes left. If you have some other comments or question, okay. All right. We have two more. Yeah, I'll take the last minutes for my own question or after the program. Yeah. So from Pak Zulfan, he's our faculty member. Yeah.
Thank you, Bunia. Pak Kim, I'm very impressed with your study about Muhammadiyah and Islam in Indonesia. But my question is not about that. My question is a bit more personal, in the sense that as Korean academic, professor in Korean university, and you have so deep knowledge about Muhammadiyah, about Islam in Indonesia, and I'm sure that you are probably the most knowledgeable Korean academics about Islam or about Muhammadiyah. Uh, I doubt that you will find a counterpart in Indonesia who understand one or two aspects of social life in
Korea and becoming the most knowledgeable Indonesian about that particular aspect of socio-political life in Korea. So it seems to me that this is a kind of imbalance encounter, if you like. So I just want to ask your personal reflections on that one. On that one, you, I'm sure that you speak Bahasa, you understand Indonesia, you understand the language, the culture, but probably you will not find your counterpart in Indonesia uh, who does the same. So how would you explain this? This is about just the extensions of economic power or political influence, or how would you reflect on this?
Yes, that's a very good comments and question because I'm also I have been thinking about that for quite a long time because I also have some Indonesian students in my university, and I also have interaction with Indonesian students in other universities. But to me, at first, the thing is that the Indonesian government should give more scholarship to students of humanities. I think that because, for example, in my university, there are about 35 Indonesian students, and among 35, because I've done some brief survey among them last about about half year ago, about 35, 34 study science and technology, and just one in the field of management. So it's a quite, how can I say, it's a problem of, at first, I think, problem of scholarship, because scholarship always has to the areas of science and technology. So students in that area can easily move into Korea. But actually, even if they stayed in Korea for 5 years for their PhDs, actually they could not speak Korean because, yeah, English is enough, and what they do is in their laboratory. So in that sense, I think some Indonesian students who are familiar with Korean culture, who understand Korean history and language or something like that, we need more scholarships from Indonesian government or Korean government too, but both of them prefer to giving scholarship to the scientists because they believe Korea is still anyway, Korea is a little bit advanced in technology or something like that. So in that sense, Indonesian government, I think, should do something more to raise the sort of specialist who can say something, or who can say a very important, who can bring some insight into the Indonesian society. I firmly believe that, yeah, I'm just a scholar in Korea, but I firmly believe I have contributed a little bit to what improve the perception of Koreans toward Indonesia, toward the Islamic culture or something like that. So there should be some more support. Without support, as Papa knows, yeah, it's totally difficult. So the support, full support for studying about Korean culture or Korean religion, or not just economy, because in the field of economy, they also use numbers. So even if they cannot speak Korean, they can finish their thesis on Korean economy or something like that. So only those in the field of humanities or in some areas of social sciences, political science, sociology, and anthropology. Yeah, what is needed is the local knowledge. What so in that sense, I also try to find out some Indonesians who can Indonesian students who can pursue their study, but still, yeah, there are not many. Yeah, that's my answer.
There is diplomatic answer, by the way. Yeah, but it's true. I mean, yeah, there should be two ways solution, right? Government, Indonesian government, you know, giving some more scholarship to Koreans to improve Indonesian studies in Korea, and also vice versa, you know. Yeah. So we go to the last question probably from, yeah, from Ma'ruf Amin. This is probably the last question. Make it short.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you, Professor Kim. My name is Maruf Aman from Faculty of Education. I'm from Pakistan. So my question is, whenever there is a particular gap in the society that certain people see, and then after seeing that particular gap, they come up with a certain organization or an ideology so that they can make the common people energized and activists so that that particular gap can be fulfilled. So, for example, in this case, Muhammadiyah was the one, it was founded in order to advocate ijtihad, the concept of ijtihad. So, whenever there is any concept and it's lacking in, people come up with certain organizations so that that concept, people start following that concept. It's same in Pakistan. Many people coming up with so many organizations so that certain concepts, people start believing in them and they start following them. I would like to know whether is it the same in Korea or not. Whenever there is any religious scare, people can really as easily as in Pakistan and Indonesia come up with a certain organization, or it's really really difficult. What is the situation there? Thank you so much.
Yeah, but I think the gap maybe takes a lot of time for the gap to be filled. So actually, this yeah, in the case of Muhammadiyah, I think the gap has not yet been filled. So the Muhammadiyah actually what the thesis that I'm proposing may be applied to the activist, the level who could be termed activists, so the intellectuals or something, someone like that, and their ideas have not yet penetrated to the masses. So in that sense, yeah, it has been more than 100 years. For example, in the case of Muhammadiyah, they make some movement, religious movement, and it has going on for the last 100 years. But if the between gap between the leaders or the key members and the ordinary masses has not been yet fully but filled. So in this sense, I think something like concepts can be penetrated more easily. But it is not just a few concepts, but it is a mode of behavior. So it took more time for us to what show for us to see whether the gap between for example, the center and the periphery, or whether we call it the gap between leader and the masses, could be filled or not. So it takes more time for us to see whether, for example, the democratic practices within Muhammadiyah activists could be applied to the supporters. Yeah, it is said that the number might be 30,000 or something like that. I think it's an exaggeration, but anyway, at least there are 10,000, 10 million followers of Muhammadiyah. It is quite more accurate. So in this sense, we have to see more in the future. I think it cannot be say automatically that because that ideology or some concepts are inputted or what accepted by the some of the key groups, then it could be spread to the outside world, something like that. I think we need more time to see, even it is an organization having a more than 100 years of history. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's gonna end our program today. But let me just give you some, positive ending remarks that whatever, the discussion we have today about Muhammadiyah as an Islamic organization and its democratic tradition that has been highlighted by Professor Kim is indeed can be a potential solution to whatever politic, democratic problem we Indonesian have at the moment. So yeah, thank you so much, Professor Kim. We are honored to have you here, and thank you so much for everybody. Please keep in touch with us. We will hold another series of Brownbag in the coming week, next week. So yeah, we'll be happy to see you again coming back. Okay, thank you so much.